the biggest mistakes are made on the first day of the project. This was something that my former professor, Jay Baldwin, told me when I was a student at California College of the Arts. And I didn't really understand the value of it then, but several years into being a professional industrial designer, I definitely understand it now. In this video, we're going to talk about the reason why many hardware products fail and how to avoid those common pitfalls. Basically, I'm going to draw from about a decade of experience here and just tell you what I've learned from these successes and, more importantly, the failures. The biggest issue for startups is addressing a clearly understood problem and solving that problem very elegantly and simply, preferably better than any of your competitors. This might be something that seems obvious to designers, but it doesn't necessarily come naturally to other disciplines. What happens in a lot of other disciplines is they'll come up with, an interesting or novel technology and then try and sort of figure out what a good use case might be for that technology. And there's nothing wrong with doing product development through that method. It works very well. There are many successful companies that have done that. But it can be problematic if you don't really understand who your user is, what you're sort of targeting as a criteria for success, and things like that. So a great example of this is the Segway. This is a perfect example of a solution in search of a problem. The issue with it is that, walking is not really that much of a problem, and that was the problem that it was purported to solve. Good product development starts with an intimate understanding of your user and the use case. And then from there, you can start to generate solutions. That means you need to be targeted in your approach. So the Segway wasn't really targeted. It was just kind of for everyone. And as a result of that, it sort of wasn't for anyone. By establishing such a broad audience without a clear problem to solve, basically nobody bought it because it wasn't clear who it was for. So this can easily be avoided. All you need to do is pick a specific use case, pick a specialized niche, and solve that really, really well. Now, of course, you don't want to design a product for 5 people, unless maybe, you can make $10 million per unit. But generally speaking, you want a large enough market to have a profitable business, but it needs to be focused enough that it has certain benefits for your specific user. So this next point is somewhat related, and I've talked about it before, but I'm going to go a little bit more in depth in this video. You got to establish a clear vision for your product. If you don't establish a clear vision, decision-making becomes subjective, and this is the enemy of good design. You want to be as objective as you can. Now, ideally you want to be designing based on quantitative data, but that's not always possible, and that's totally okay. You can use qualitative data, but you want to have some kind of information that you're drawing from. You don't want it to be arbitrary. Every single product detail, every single design, every single feature should sort of ladder up to a unified goal. And that goal should always be in service of the customer's needs and that use case. So one symptom of not having a clear vision is that rifts in the team will start to form. People are going to start infighting. There's going to be arguments about what should be done for a product feature, or what should be included in a product, or what shouldn't be included. And then gradually people are going to start to take sides. And then people are going to start to work on separate things sort of in secret from each other. And this is the beginning of the end for any company or any product development cycle. If you're in this cycle and there's this sort of rift and breakdown in communication, it's over. So you need to fix this immediately. So the easiest way to deal with this is to not let it happen in the first place. If it does happen, you just got to get in a meeting with your team and come to some kind of a consensus. I found that the best way to handle this is to basically work with your team to craft the vision together. I'm not saying that, business people should be making decisions around design and ergonomics, and I'm not saying that designers should be making final decisions around pricing strategy, for example. I'm just saying that there needs to be some kind of unified input, because if everybody sort of feels like they contributed to this vision, they're going to be much more likely to follow through with it. So that's the best way to keep this from breaking down. It's the best way to kind of keep the team unified and together and working towards one single goal. Just like a good design, I've found that the best design goals are really straightforward, simple, preferably one sentence. Just really straightforward, simple stuff. I make it a point to write this design goal down so that everybody can reference it whenever they need to. And it's okay if this design goal changes over time and evolves. That's actually pretty common. I mean, startups make pivots all the time. It's not a big deal. It's just important that it's done in a way that is unified and as a team, as a collective, not just one person sort of going off on their own. So here's an example of a product vision that I wrote together with a team a couple years ago, and it worked really well. Design a pair of men's sunglass frames that can be worn under a pilot's helmet. Without even getting into any concrete requirements, we know a lot about what this design needs to do just from this one sentence. You can go a lot further with this, and you should go much further by adding in user perceptions, physical attributes, usability attributes, things like that. So for example, in terms of a hard requirement, you could say that a user needs to be able to wear these while flying a plane for 6 hours, let's say. And they need to wear it in a way where they don't feel the need to adjust it due to discomfort. Now, of course, that can vary considerably from person to person, but at least you have a starting point in terms of how you need to design these things. And you can make a lot of inferences about how the design needs to function and what some of the features are. So you know what it needs to do. Now, how do we design that to work? So what we ended up doing was making some very, very thin temples. They were only about 1 millimeter thick, and they were very flexible so that they could sort of bend underneath the helmet so that they were super comfortable. So from that, we have a very clear benchmark for what we needed to accomplish. And from there, we could sort of make up some designs that fulfilled that use case. By the way, if you made it this far into the video, it means that you're probably very passionate about design, and that's great. You should check out the Discord chat server. I left a link in the description. Check out the link in the description. And in that chat, we basically just talk about design. We give each other feedback about our projects, and we just help each other out. Also, if you're not subscribed, you should totally subscribe. I mean, it's great. It's a great channel. It helps me out. So back to the video. One other common thing is sort of a disconnect or a communication breakdown between teams. So design doesn't speak to engineering, engineering doesn't speak to design. Things are just sort of handed off arbitrarily. And this can lead to problems because design hands something to engineering and the design intent isn't realized. It's not at all what the designer had in mind. Or maybe the designer never consulted with the engineer and the product that they've designed is completely unfeasible and unmanufacturable. So it's important that you talk with each other. Now, this is difficult because especially at larger companies, these teams span several continents. It's a real challenge to keep in touch. I don't know if I have any specific advice other than to just basically network within the company and treat that as part of your job. That's really it. Now, there are some cases where there is malicious intent and certain teams try to isolate themselves from others so that they can basically steal all the glory. This rarely works out well, and I wouldn't recommend ever doing this. And it just creates a toxic work culture in general. But that's not usually the case. That's not common. It does happen, but it's not typical. What's more common is that people just don't talk to each other. And really what it comes down to is just maybe setting up a meeting once every 2 weeks for 30 minutes and just talk about what you're working on. Another common mistake is just not having experts on the team who really understand the space that you're working in. So more specifically, using this eyewear example for pilots, you probably should have a pilot on the team. Maybe you can get away without one. If you don't have a pilot, you need to spend a lot of time speaking with pilots and observing pilots. That needs to be a major priority for you. Another thing is eyewear. So eyewear is sort of this very specific, specialized area of industrial design. You probably are going to want somebody who understands that space very intimately if you're going to be designing eyewear. Now, it's not a requirement. I mean, design is a methodology for solving problems. And if you understand the process of design, you can get away with maybe not having that specific experience. It's not a requirement. But I would say that in this case, maybe they don't need to have eyewear experience, but they should have an understanding of devices with strict ergonomic requirements, preferably around the face. That might be enough to sort of make a lot of inferences on how to design a piece of eyewear. Another big issue with startups is just waiting too long to launch a product. Obviously, the longer you wait to launch a product, the more money you spend and the more time you waste developing the product. And this can be a problem because at some point you need answers around whether your business is valid, whether it is capable of sustaining you, and whether it is profitable and worth exploring and continuing on. And really the only way to do that is just through a proof of concept. You need to move forward and just launch something. Now, there's a trade-off. I mean, you don't want to launch too early because that's going to alienate your customers, your first customers. They're going to feel like they can't trust you and they'll just abandon you. But generally speaking, you want to err on the side of launching early. Generally speaking, your first customers understand that this is maybe a beta product and it's not going to be perfect. And you can do things to sort of temper their expectations, maybe give them a discount or even give it to them for free so that you can learn from that experience. The more users you have using your product, the more you can get feedback and the more you can develop it and improve it, which is really the main purpose of getting your product out quickly. It gives you feedback so that you can learn and move forward. So onto that quote from my former professor, "The biggest mistakes are made on the first day of the project." What did he mean by that specifically? Well, basically what he meant is that everybody has assumptions around a specific area. You may not even realize that you have those assumptions, which is why you need to constantly question yourself. And the reason why this is so important is because it puts your company on a trajectory, and it can be very, very hard to reverse it. Now, continuing on with this sunglasses for pilots example, the question now becomes, are sunglasses actually the best solution for this? I mean, if you need protection from the sun, there are a lot of other ways to do it. I mean, you could have some sort of a visor that goes over the face. You could have maybe some sort of tinted material that goes over the windows themselves. Maybe the issue is that you need corrective lenses. You need a prescription so that you can see. Well, contact lenses do that pretty well. So do you really even need sunglasses? That eliminates the issue of tension around the ear. Now, the best way to really get at the root of these problems is to really understand your user and your use case and really take the time to understand what the problem is that you're solving. While it is important to have a really clear vision and goal in mind, it is okay to pivot. It's, in fact, quite common for startups to do that. You don't need to be dogmatic about your product vision. It's okay to change it. The main point that I want to make is that it needs to be done on a unified, team-wide front. Really, the main thing is that adaptability and flexibility is key if you're working in any sort of company, especially a startup. You really just got to roll with the punches. That's kind of my main piece of advice. I know it's cliche, but it's very useful. You need to be resilient if you're working at these smaller companies, simply because it's hard. All right, so this was a longer video and there was a lot in it. So let's go over each of these points again really quickly as a summary. You want to address a problem and then solve it. You need to understand your user and use case, and you always want to be as specific and targeted as possible. You need to establish a clear, simple vision, and every single product detail, every single design detail should ladder up to that vision and be in service of it. When you're crafting your vision, you want to do it as a team. However, at the same time, you don't want to design by committee. Design should be leading the design. The best design goals are simple and straightforward. You want to communicate among the people within your team, the people outside of your team, and external vendors. Always consult with the experts and have them on your team whenever possible. Don't wait to launch your product. You need to get feedback early and often so that you can improve later iterations. Always question your assumptions. Even if you're wrong, it's okay to course correct later on. Now, if you look at a lot of these points, they kind of seem like common sense. Even though they seem like common sense, many teams just don't follow these proven techniques. So it's always good to kind of check in with yourself and the rest of your team to make sure that you're executing on all of these very important points. Anyway, thanks again, guys. Have a great day, and I hope you learned something.